I didn't mention my $11 million at my daughter's wedding until she called me bum in her speech. I knew before the appetizers that I would remember the smell of the orchids longer than the taste of the food. Sweet and expensive and strangely lonely, like perfume sprayed into an empty room. The ballroom ceiling glittered with chandeliers that looked like winter storms frozen in mid-fall. The marble floor mirrored tall men in tight tuxedos and women with careful hair, and every reflection felt like a world I was not meant to step into. My table sat close to the exit, beside a potted palm used to hide a service door. When I leaned back, the hinges breathed against my shoulder as waiters slipped in and out carrying trays that were heavier than they had to be. The photographer, a kid with a beard that hadn't decided what it wanted to be, never came near me. Clara waved to me when she entered. That part is true. She saw me. She turned her face toward me the way a lighthouse turns toward the sea. Beautiful, distant, designed more to warn than to welcome. Her new husband Adrian was all square jaw and perfect tailoring, a man who had figured out how to make his shoes shine even in shadows. His parents walked behind them as if they'd purchased the aisle by the foot. When they reached the dais, the crowd lifted its phones like a field of glass lilies. I stayed seated. My knees aren't what they used to be, and also, I wanted to watch the show. I built things for a living, roads mostly, and concrete shells that other men turned into malls or offices and filled with their gloss. There's a kind of pride in knowing how earth shifts under weight and how water sneaks in through the tiniest lie in a seam. You can't fool soil. It remembers where rivers used to run. For 40 years I made a living listening to that memory and convincing it to be still long enough for people to park their cars and eat pretzels. I sold the company when my hands started needing 2 pills in the morning instead of 1. 11 million, after the accountants had finished arguing with gravity. I didn't tell my daughter the number. She already thought I had nothing she wanted. The string quartet in the corner worked so hard to be invisible they became impossible to ignore. The lead violinist looked like he wanted to run, but his bow hand kept saying, "Wait." Clara was radiant, yes, because that is the word we all agreed to use. Her mother would have said the same. If her mother had still been alive, maybe the edges tonight would have been softer. Maybe not. Loss doesn't change the shape of a knife. It only teaches you how to bleed more quietly. A waiter refilled my water glass with an apology I hadn't asked for. "Do you need anything else, sir?" he whispered. "Sir," like a bandage. I told him I was fine and folded my napkin into smaller and smaller squares until it felt like something that could keep a secret. The speeches started. Adrian's father told a story about the day his son learned to tie his shoes, checking his watch between sentences. Adrian's mother cried perfectly. The maid of honor spoke about college and friendship, and the crowd laughed at places where there weren't jokes because laughter was part of the choreography. When Clara stood, silence rose like a choir. She didn't look at notes. She didn't need to. I knew that voice. It had emptied its pockets into my hands when she was little and afraid of thunderstorms. It had asked for money without asking when she was older and the world needed to be impressed. It had told me once, years ago, "Dad, someday I want a wedding where everything is perfect. No corners cut." Is that petty? I said no then. I didn't believe it, but she needed me to say it. "Tonight," she began, "I want to thank the people who showed me who I am." She spoke about resilience, ambition, destiny. She thanked her mentor at the firm for seeing potential in her, thanked Adrian for teaching her what home could mean, thanked his parents for raising a man with standards. The word landed like a coin on a glass table. She turned. She found me. The room tilted toward her, even air leaning to listen. "And my father," she said, and my heart stood up because old habits die stubbornly. "He did his best," she continued lightly, "even when he had nothing. Even when he was just a bum." It wasn't the word alone. Words are jars. You feel their weight by what you put in them. She filled that one with a room's approval, with a smile shaped like a paper cut. Laughter scattered politely. Not a roar, just enough to show the joke had cleared customs. At my table by the service door, the palm leaves trembled as if a draft had found them. I kept my face still. You learn that in construction too, how to hold a line when pressure comes, how to let something crack inside you exactly where you planned so the rest can stand. I raised my glass to her. I don't remember what I drank. The taste fled with the first swallow and never came back. There are nights when a man realizes the past is not a road behind him, but a weight on his back. I drove home with the radio off. The tuxedo rental itched. Streetlights printed yellow bones on the hood of my car. Somewhere between the 10th and 11th red light, I heard my late wife, Mara, say my name the way she did when she disapproved of my patience. Ed. One syllable, no place to hide. At my kitchen table, the house held its old breaths. The refrigerator hummed. The clock dared me to pretend time wasn't doing math at my expense. I took out the envelope that held my will. I had rewritten it twice since Mara died, once in fury, once in shame. Both versions were wrong because both were arguments with ghosts, not provisions for the living. I laid the paper flat and smoothed the creases with my palm. Wealth is quiet if you let it be. Mine was scattered like careful seeds, a handful of rental units under a holding company with a name nobody remembered, municipal bonds Mara used to call boring miracles, a portfolio my advisor joked could fall asleep standing up, and a minority stake in a firm that poured concrete more precisely than I ever could. The rest sat in a trust, waiting for me to say who I loved most. Clara's name was everywhere in the old drafts. College, down payments, emergencies that arrived every season with different hats. I had paid for orthodontia and oboes, for summer programs where she learned how to look rich even when she wasn't, for internships that didn't pay, and apartments that charged triple because they were close to places where futures were handed out like favors. When she was 12, she told me she was embarrassed by my hands. They look like maps, she said, and I laughed because I love maps. She didn't. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I brewed coffee strong enough to forgive, then poured it down the drain because forgiveness needs precision, and I didn't have any. The birds started talking to each other as if the dark had been a misunderstanding. I called my attorney at 8. "Mark," I said, "I want to make changes." He cleared his throat. He knew me well enough to hear the earthquake coming. "What kind of changes, Ed?" "The kind I don't regret at noon," I said. We met at 10. He wears suits the way cranes hold steel, carefully, at angles that acknowledge gravity. I told him what happened. I told him about the word. He kept his face still. Good man. I asked him to move the trust out of Clara's reach and into the hands of the only people in the family who had never tried to be anyone but themselves, my grandchildren, Lily and Noah. 10 and 7. Professionals at telling the truth and finding the one cookie nobody noticed. The trust would blossom when they turned 21, with protections a pack of wolves couldn't chew through. Education? Covered. Health? Covered. A home so they wouldn't have to barter with dignity? Covered, but only if they were kind. I wrote that into the trust with language Mark's paralegal would later call poetry with teeth. And Clara? Mark asked. A stipend for 6 months, I said, and my voice did not tremble. Enough to land somewhere safe and take a breath. After that, she can ask me like a daughter or not ask me at all. He nodded slowly. There's one more thing I want, I added. I want the trust to include a letter. From me to the kids. You can write it here, he said, sliding a legal pad across the desk. I wrote it by hand. Words do different work when your fingers carry them. I told Lily and Noah what their grandmother believed, that kindness is an infrastructure, invisible until it fails, and then you see its importance in every collapsed bridge between people. I told them Money is a tool that builds faster when you measure twice. I told them the truth about my hands. I told them that the night their mother called me a bum, I learned I had built too many things that did not know how to shelter me. I told them they did. Mark watched me sign with the care of a man witnessing an oath. "You're sure?" he said, a question that was also a prayer. "I am." I didn't tell him the second part because it was not his job to bless it. At noon, I drove to a bank that doesn't bother with signs. Inside, a woman with a voice like a velvet stamp led me to a conference room where numbers put on quiet shoes. "Mr. Hale," she said, "your line of credit is approved as always. What do you need?" "I want to buy a note," I said. She raised an eyebrow slightly, a bird testing the wind. "Residential?" "Townhouse on Birch Lane," I said, giving the address I had memorized when Clara had texted me a photo of the front steps during escrow last month. I had responded with a heart and a thumbs up because modern love required hieroglyphics. She and Adrian had bragged about the rate they'd secured from a lender known for handing out money like brochures. Those kinds of lenders sell their loans as if they were summer fruit, sweet and gone by September. She tapped keys. "There's a package of Birch Lane loans being sold by an institutional investor next week," she said. "Yours is in it." "It isn't mine," I said, and she smiled slightly. "Do you want to move before the auction?" she asked. "There are ways." "I prefer doors to windows," I said. "Tell me the price and show me the front door." 3 signatures later, the bank agreed to represent a quiet buyer. 2 days later, the institution in New York never even learned my name when my offer reached them with the smell of certainty money gives off when it doesn't have to try. By Friday, a holding company I had used for a decade to own small, useful things owned Clara and Adrian's mortgage. I didn't touch it. I just held it the way a storm holds back rain when it wants you to hear yourself. That weekend, I went to the old yard on the edge of the city where my company used to stage trucks, where the gravel remembers the weight of my life. The new owners had paved over most of it with bright promises and new equipment, but the corner near the fence still had the stain of oil from a loader that had refused to die the year Mara got sick. I stood there and listened to the hum of machines and thought about the only other asset I owned that could change a man's posture when he learned about it. 10% of AlvaCast Structures, the concrete subcontractor who poured half the high-rises Adrian's firm designed. AlvaCast paid its debts every month as if the calendar was a threat. The founder, a woman named Natalia who wore boots like a foreman and numbers like a crown, had once told me, "If the architects are the music, we're the rhythm." Nobody dances without us. Natalia owed me nothing but respect, and I had never asked for more. I called her anyway. "Ed," she said, "you still awake this early?" "I remember when 5 a.m. was late," I said. She laughed. "I need a favor paid for in full," I continued. "I need you to invite me to your next project walkthrough, the one on Ellis Street, the one Adrian's firm is leading silence for a moment, during which I could hear steel deciding how to be straight. "You want to meet your son-in-law at work," she said. "I want to meet the truth," I said. "Tuesday," she replied. "Wear a helmet." "We enforce the rules even when we like you." "On Monday night," Clara called. I stared at her name as if the letters were asking me to pass inspection. "Dad," she said when I answered, "you left early." "Traffic," I said. A pause shaped like a question mark. "I hope you weren't offended by my speech," she added lightly. It was a joke. Everyone laughed. I watched the window where sunset tested the blinds. "I heard," I said. "You know how Adrian's family is," she continued quickly. "They're traditional. They put a lot of weight on appearances. I'm trying to fit in. And you think calling your father a bum helps," I said. My voice had lost its temperature somewhere between the bank and the yard. She exhaled, annoyed. "I think you're making this about yourself." "The speech was about yourself," I said. "You're responsible for it." "If you're going to sulk," she snapped, Maybe you should take some time away. Give us space to start our marriage without drama. I can give space, I said. I'm good at it. Before she could answer, I added, Congratulations, Clara. Another pause, this one flat as a plank. Thanks, Dad, she said. The line went quiet. I stood in the kitchen and listened to the refrigerator remember what it was supposed to do. Tuesday, I stepped onto Ella Street in a hard hat and a vest that used to fit me better. The air tasted like dust and ambition. Rebar reached for sky. Men moved with the choreography of people who know a mistake can end you. Natalia lifted a hand and introduced me as a longtime partner who knows what the ground thinks. Adrian glanced over because politeness has a magnet in it. Our eyes met, and for a fraction of a second I saw confusion replace precision. He recognized me, but not the context. He looked for Clara, for a cue about how to position me socially, but all he found was concrete. We walked the perimeter. He said the right things to the wrong people. He corrected a foreman about a detail he'd already solved better than Adrian's software. He laughed a little too loudly when a crane operator refused to hurry gravity. His cuff brushed wet form oil and left a stain the size of a coin. During the break, Natalia pulled me aside. Your son-in-law is loud where he should be exact, she murmured. But he isn't dumb. Just rehearsed, I repeated, remembering the wedding. Yes. Adrian approached with the swagger of a man whose audience had not yet learned their lines. So, he said, looking me up and down as if measuring how much respect could fit into a vest. You're Clara's father. I am, I said. Did you enjoy the wedding? He asked, not waiting for the answer. We spared no expense. I noticed, I said. He laughed, a sound that wanted witnesses. Don't worry, he added, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Clara has a soft spot for you. She insisted we invite you, even though, well, his eyes flicked to my boots. Even though? I prompted. Even though we had to keep the guest list tight, he said, backpedaling toward the lie. You understand. I understand a lot of things, I said. For example, I understand that if you vibrate these forms too long, you'll segregate the mix and the slab will hate you for the rest of its life. He blinked. Natalia managed not to smile. We finished the walk-through. As he shook my hand, he squeezed too hard, the way young men do when they think strength is a performance. If you ever need design advice, he said, call me. I can show you what a modern portfolio looks like. I'll do that, I said, and left before he could make another sound like a promise. That night, I took the letter Mara wrote me on the morning of her first chemo and set it on the table. She had copied 3 recipes on the back because she believed in sneaking comfort into dark places. The second paragraph of her letter reads, in part, if grief makes you quieter, Ed, don't confuse that with humility. You can be kind and still speak. You can be generous and still set the price. I read that line twice, and then a third time because the first 2 held my throat, and the third freed my hands. On Wednesday, I called the bank and had them transfer the mortgage to a different servicer, my servicer. Paperwork moved through invisible rooms with the speed of guilt. On Friday, Clara called again. We're having a small dinner on Sunday, she said. Just family and a few close friends. It would mean a lot to me if you showed up and behaved, I said. Please don't make things difficult, she whispered. Her voice had edges I didn't recognize. I remembered her at 6, asking if thunder could break windows, and if I could fix them if it did. I remembered telling her yes to the first, and of course to the second, because that is how fathers build courage in their children, bricks of assurance laid in straight lines. I'll be there, I said, and I'll be myself. Thank you, she said, as if she were the one making the concession. I arrived on time and brought flowers that looked expensive because they were. The townhouse was a museum arranged by a patron who wanted the grant renewed. On the wall above the fireplace hung a painting of a blue square deciding whether it wanted to be a window. Guests stood in clusters like punctuation marks, periods near the bar, exclamation points near Adrian's laughter, commas drifting toward anyone who promised a story about a place they'd been last month that you had not. Adrian greeted me with a kiss in the air near my cheek. If you don't land, you can't be blamed for bruises. His mother, Sylvia, appeared with a smile that looked as if it had been ironed that afternoon. "Edward," she cooed, "so lovely to see you. Clara always speaks of your simplicity." The word hung between us like a chandelier missing half its crystals. "Thank you," I said. We took our seats. Clara tapped her glass for attention. "I want to correct something from the wedding," she began, and for a moment my chest forgot how to move. "I called my father a bum," she continued, glancing around as if expecting sympathy for the burden of confessing. Obviously, I didn't mean it literally. I was poking fun at his modesty. "He hates when I spend money on the wrong things," I said before my good sense could catch my honesty and silence it. A rustle went through the room. Adrian's father frowned as if someone had started a chainsaw during a cello solo. "Edward," he said, "perhaps we should keep the focus on celebration, not budgeting." "Celebration is a kind of budgeting," I said. "You decide what deserves to be spent." "Dad," Clara hissed, "don't start." "Start what?" I asked softly. "Telling the truth?" She put down her glass with more energy than it required. "You're making everyone uncomfortable." "Then let me help them relax," I said. I reached into my jacket and placed a small stack of envelopes on the table. Faces brightened. People love envelopes more than they love people. Adrian's smile sharpened as if it had smelled meat. "These," I said, "are letters, not checks." A few laughs died mid-flight. I handed one to Clara. Her name in my old, careful handwriting looked like a bridge I had built too narrow. She took it anyway, manners wrestling vanity to a draw. I handed a second envelope to Adrian. He smirked, the way a man smirks when he believes a test is one he wrote. "Before you open them," I said, "I would like to propose a toast." I stood, knees held. "Thank you, knees." "To my daughter and her husband," I said. "To the new life they are building on Birch Lane." A murmur. "How did you—" Clara began, then stopped. Someone had posted their address when they moved. She remembered that too late. "I know a little about building," I continued, "and a little about foundations. I know this. If you pour on unstable ground, the slab will settle and crack, and everything you erect will groan when the wind changes." Adrian chuckled, significantly. "We're not worried about our foundation, Edward," he said. "We have a fixed rate." "You have a fixed idea," I said. "Not the same thing." He raised his glass to hide his frown. "Cheers to metaphors," he said. "Now," I said, "open your letters." Clara slid a finger under the seal and pulled out a single page. She read the first line, blinked, read it again as if the words might decide to be kinder. Adrian unfolded his and smiled until he didn't. "Congratulations," I said gently. "Your mortgage has a new servicer. They're exacting but fair. You'll find the schedule of payment reminders on the second page and the consequences for late fees on the third. The servicer has also reviewed your HOA documents and discovered non-compliance with several clauses related to alterations of common property, specifically the removal of a juniper bush you mistook for aggressive landscaping. The fines are outlined. If you want to argue, the servicer has a phone number. It routes to a person whose expression won't change while you volunteer your indignation." Clara stared at me. Her mouth opened and closed without words, like a fish pulled into a world where breathing was complicated. "How?" she started. "The servicer," I said, and let the sentence be a mirror. They own your note." She turned pages more frantically. "Hale Holding, LLC," she read aloud. "Who is that?" "A company," I said. "Belonging to a man you called a bum. Adrian's father recovered first." "This is inappropriate," he announced, standing as if he were in a boardroom with a gavel waiting for a hand. "You cannot ambush young people at their own dinner with paperwork." I looked at him with the patience you learn from concrete. "Paperwork is how society agrees to be civilized," I said. "It is also how contempt disguises itself as policy. If you prefer we speak without paper, we can step outside and use stones." "Ed," Clara whispered. The whispered ED, the one that used to mean monsters under the bed. "Are you doing this to punish me?" "No," I said, and realized it was true. "I am doing this to stop you from thinking the world is a buffet where someone else's father fills your plate and then apologizes for the quality of the napkins." Adrian leaned back in his chair, adopting the posture I had seen at the job site when he needed height he hadn't earned. "You're overstepping," he said. "Clara and I are starting our life. You don't get to dictate terms. I prefer to set boundaries," I said. "Terms are for people who think language will save them from their choices." He laughed then, a brittle sound. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he said. "I work with the largest developers in this city. If you so much as hiccup near our affairs, my firm will bury you in paper so deep you'll think you were born in a filing cabinet." I took an envelope from my inner pocket and slid it across the table unhurried, as if time enjoyed being treated with respect. "Adrian," I said, "do you know the name of the subcontractor who poured the foundation on Ellis Street?" He frowned. "Alvacast," he said. "Why?" "Because I own 10% of Alvacast," I said, softly enough that the words found the places in the room that preferred whispers. "I don't call in favors the way people in your world do. But if I ask Alvacast to read every clause in every contract with your firm 3 times before they agree to pour a cup of coffee, they will, because they respect the man who stood with them in the rain for 30 years and never asked them to pretend the mud wasn't real." Silence. Actual silence. The kind that makes people check whether their phones still have service. "I am not threatening your career," I continued. "I am threatening the illusion that it is immune to the very systems you use to measure other people's worth." Adrian's cheek twitched. He took a breath through his nose, as if air might be persuaded to supply victory. Clara spoke before he could. "Dad," she said, "I will apologize for what I said at the wedding." The words sounded like they were standing in a doorway, unsure whether they were welcome. "But you are humiliating us in front of people who believed in us." "Do you know who believed in me?" I asked. "Your mother. Even when I poured road after road in a world that thought asphalt made a man dumb. She believed I knew how to get from here to there without lying to the map. I kept my wealth quiet because she preferred it that way, and because I thought you'd be happier not having to perform gratitude every time you wanted something. I see now that silence taught you contempt by accident. That is my fault. This is my correction. I did not stay for dessert." As I reached the door, Lily's hand caught mine. "Grandpa," she whispered, eyes wide, not with fear, but with the kind of wonder that comes when children finally catch adults speaking in primary colors. "What's a bum?" "It depends who's using the word," I said. "When a cruel person says it, it means someone they think they can step on. When a kind person says it, it means someone who needs a sandwich. I am neither. I am your grandfather. Remember that when you are older and words try to trick you." She nodded with the seriousness of 10. "Can we get sandwiches soon?" she asked. I smiled. "Yes," I said. On the sidewalk, the night pressed its cool palm against my face. A couple walked by laughing the laugh of people free of history. A bus sighed. A dog on a leash decided which story to believe about a lamppost. At home I slept. Not well, but enough to put mourning where it belonged. In the weeks that followed, My servicer did what servicers do when envelopes are not opened, and reminders are read with indignation instead of pens. Late fees compiled a case against pride. The HOA fines made music. Adrian sent me a text. Childish, he wrote. I almost responded with a photograph of a foundation poured over uncompacted fill, but metaphors get lost on men who only understand diagrams. At work, Adrian discovered that Alvacast had legal questions about indemnity, insurance limits, and a line in a contract that allowed for schedule adjustments when site access was delayed by unprofessional conduct by upper management. Apparently, upper management had accused a foreman of theft for using extra rebar chairs. The foreman had produced the order sheet signed by Adrian's own project manager. Natalia enjoyed asking whether the modern portfolio included humility. Clara came by my house one afternoon. She did not call first. The screen door complained when I opened it. She stood on my porch with the tentative posture of a person whose internal map had mislabeled several streets and was now being generous with blame. "Can we talk?" she asked. "We are," I said, stepping aside. She sat at the table where Mara wrote recipes on the backs of bills because she believed flavor should be paid forward. Clara ran a finger along a scratch I had never gotten around to sanding out. "I told my friends you grew up poor," she said finally. "It made my success look larger." "Do you understand what I'm saying?" "I do," I said. "You used my story as sand to anchor your castle." She winced. "I'm sorry for calling you a bum," she said. "I thought it was funny. And I'm sorry for teaching you that money was something to hide so completely you mistook silence for absence," I said. "Both of us failed to respect what built us." Her shoulders sank. "Adrian is furious," she admitted. "He says you're trying to control us. I'm trying to give you a chance to see the difference between control and consequence," I said. "If you insist on standing on a ledge, I will build a railing. If you refuse to use it, I will build a net. If you cut the net because you think falling is freedom, I will walk away and listen for the thud like any other man who once knew how to prevent it." Tears formed. She leaned back to resist them. They came anyway. "I miss Mom," she said, and the room rearranged itself around the honesty. Her voice would have stopped me. "She would have raised a hand," I said, lifting my left as if to catch an old light. "Then she would have made tea and asked why the word in your mouth tasted like victory when it should have tasted like ash." Clara laughed through her tears. "She did make rude words taste like ash," she murmured. "Dad, will you forgive me?" "I'm your father," I said. "I forgave you before you finished the speech." "Then why the servicer and the fines and the net?" "Because forgiveness without boundary is surrender," I said. "I will not surrender my dignity to satisfy your membership dues." She exhaled a long breath that sounded like paper leaving a binder. "What if I thought I didn't have a choice?" she asked. "Adrian's family wants standards," I said. "Remind them that standards applied only outward are called judgments." She nodded slowly, as if the idea had a taste she could live with. "Could you at least talk to the servicer?" she asked, a small smile trying to be brave. "Maybe waive a fee or two?" "The servicer is an entity governed by bylaws written to protect the investors," I said, keeping my expression still until the corner of my mouth betrayed me. "But I may know someone on the board." "Dad," she said, and the word had a temperature again. "Come to dinner Sunday. No speeches, no battles. Just us bring Lily and Noah," I said. "I'm making sandwiches." Sunday did not pretend to be another wedding. We sat at my small table and ate thick slices of tomato and cheese with salt generously shaken the way Mara did when she wanted the tomatoes to confess they had been warmed by the sun. Noah asked for extra mustard as if he were bargaining with a fair man. Lily brought a book about birds and tried to convince me that crows remember faces. I promised to treat the local murder with respect. When Clara and Adrian stood to leave, Adrian lingered. He put his hands in his pockets, the international signal for how much he wanted to control the terms of defeat. I overreacted, he said, choosing each syllable as if it came with a receipt. My family is intense. Concrete is stronger when it cures slowly, I said. People are too. He nodded, grateful for a sentence he could carry without dropping. About the mortgage, he began. The servicer will rescind the HOA fines if you replace the juniper you murdered, I said. They will also remove one late fee if you set up automatic payments like a person who respects calendars. He grimaced. Fine. A word that wanted to be a door but was only a window. Adrian, I said, you took a man you barely knew and tried to place him where he would embarrass you the least. I have been placed in worse corners. I grew up there. But I do not live there now. If you want to be my son-in-law, learn the difference. He looked at the floor where shoes did not have to pretend. I will try, he said. Trying is a beam. It needs posts. Over the next months, I put posts in the ground. I asked Natalia to give Adrian a tour of the parts of the process his firm pretended not to need to understand. She did it with the kindness of a teacher whose patience includes hammers. He listened. He asked one good question and 5 earnest bad ones. Progress is a staircase built of questions. At Thanksgiving, Adrian's parents came to my house because Lily insisted. Grandpa has the better stuffing, she said, a verdict I did not deserve but accepted with the solemnity it required. Sylvia looked around my living room like an anthropologist who had discovered the tribe loved books more than silver. She sat on my couch and asked me about the photograph of Mara on the mantel. She is beautiful, she said. Not was. Is. I thanked her. After dessert, Lily climbed into my lap without asking first. Her hair smelled like sugar trying to be air. Grandpa, she whispered, at school someone said you're rich. Are you? Words are jars. I picked one carefully. I have enough to make sure you can be kind without being afraid, I said. That is the only kind of rich that matters. Can we still get sandwiches? Noah asked from the floor, because history, to be useful, should repeat its best scenes. Yes, I said. But now we add pickles. In December, I went back to the bank that hides behind quiet. The woman with the velvet stamp voice brought me tea with honey as if she had learned something about men who build slowly. Mr. Hale, she said, you've never asked for a distribution in December. I need one, I said. For a scholarship fund at the city college. For people who want to learn how to build foundations no one sees and yet no one can live without. How much? She asked. Enough to make kindness a structure, I said. She knew how to translate that into numbers with commas. I made the scholarship anonymous, but I wrote a letter to the recipients and left it at the bursar's office. It said, if the world calls you a bum, eat your sandwich and keep building. On the anniversary of the wedding, Clara came to my house alone. She brought a photograph in a silver frame of the 4 of us, her, Adrian, Lily, and Noah, standing in my yard under a sky that had decided to be the right blue at the right time. On the back she wrote, for the man who taught me that foundations are love that learned how to stand. She handed me an envelope. For a moment, old muscles tensed, ready to hold a line. Inside was a card with a single sentence. I rescind the word. The ink had bites in it where the pen had pressed down on remorse. I don't deserve the trust you gave the kids, she added quietly, but I will try to become the kind of person they can thank without it costing them anything. Trying is a beam, I said. We know where to put the posts. Want standards, I said. Remind them that standards applied only outward are called judgments. She nodded slowly, as if the idea had a taste she could live with. Could you at least talk to the servicer? She asked, a small smile trying to be brave. Maybe waive a fee or two? The servicer is an entity governed by bylaws written to protect the investors, I said, keeping my expression still until the corner of my mouth betrayed me. But I may know someone on the board. Dad, she said, and the word had a temperature again. Come to dinner Sunday. No speeches, no battles. Just us bring Lily and Noah, I said. I'm making sandwiches. Sunday did not pretend to be another wedding. We sat at my small table and ate thick slices of tomato and cheese with salt generously shaken the way Mara did when she wanted the tomatoes to confess they had been warmed by the sun. Noah asked for extra mustard as if he were bargaining with a fair man. Lily brought a book about birds and tried to convince me that crows remember faces. I promised to treat the local murder with respect. When Clara and Adrian stood to leave, Adrian lingered. He put his hands in his pockets, the international signal for how much he wanted to control the terms of defeat. I overreacted, he said, choosing each syllable as if it came with a receipt. My family is intense. Concrete is stronger when it cures slowly, I said. People are too. He nodded, grateful for a sentence he could carry without dropping. About the mortgage, he began. The servicer will rescind the HOA fines if you replace the juniper you murdered, I said. They will also remove one late fee if you set up automatic payments like a person who respects calendars. He grimaced. Fine. A word that wanted to be a door but was only a window. Adrian, I said, you took a man you barely knew and tried to place him where he would embarrass you the least. I have been placed in worse corners. I grew up there. But I do not live there now. If you want to be my son-in-law, learn the difference. He looked at the floor where shoes did not have to pretend. I will try, he said. Trying is a beam. It needs posts. Over the next months, I put posts in the ground. I asked Natalia to give Adrian a tour of the parts of the process his firm pretended not to need to understand. She did it with the kindness of a teacher whose patience includes hammers. He listened. He asked one good question and 5 earnest bad ones. Progress is a staircase built of questions. At Thanksgiving, Adrian's parents came to my house because Lily insisted. Grandpa has the better stuffing, she said, a verdict I did not deserve but accepted with the solemnity it required. Sylvia looked around my living room like an anthropologist who had discovered the tribe loved books more than silver. She sat on my couch and asked me about the photograph of Mara on the mantel. She is beautiful, she said. Not was. Is. I thanked her. After dessert, Lily climbed into my lap without asking first. Her hair smelled like sugar trying to be air. Grandpa, she whispered, at school someone said you're rich. Are you? Words are jars. I picked one carefully. I have enough to make sure you can be kind without being afraid, I said. That is the only kind of rich that matters. Can we still get sandwiches? Noah asked from the floor, because history, to be useful, should repeat its best scenes. Yes, I said. But now we add pickles. In December, I went back to the bank that hides behind quiet. The woman with the velvet stamp voice brought me tea with honey as if she had learned something about men who build slowly. Mr. Hale, she said, you've never asked for a distribution in December. I need one, I said. For a scholarship fund at the city college. For people who want to learn how to build foundations no one sees and yet no one can live without. How much? She asked. Enough to make kindness a structure, I said. She knew how to translate that into numbers with commas. I made the scholarship anonymous, but I wrote a letter to the recipients and left it at the bursar's office. It said, if the world calls you a bum, eat your sandwich and keep building. On the anniversary of the wedding, Clara came to my house alone. She brought a photograph in a silver frame of the 4 of us, her, Adrian, Lily, and Noah, standing in my yard under a sky that had decided to be the right blue at the right time. On the back she wrote, for the man who taught me that foundations are love that learned how to stand. She handed me an envelope. For a moment, old muscles tensed, ready to hold a line. Inside was a card with a single sentence. I rescind the word. The ink had bites in it where the pen had pressed down on remorse. I don't deserve the trust you gave the kids, she added quietly, but I will try to become the kind of person they can thank without it costing them anything. Trying is a beam, I said. We know where to put the posts. Spring softened the city. On a clean morning in May, I stood again at Ellis Street. The building had windows now, 1,000 mirrors teaching the sky how to look at itself. Adrian shook my hand. No performance, just a human greeting. Your friend Natalia taught me more about concrete than 4 years of design school, he said. She taught you to respect what holds you up, I said. That is different. He nodded. Clara's expecting, he added, unable to prevent the light from breaking across his face. We're not telling anyone yet. But I wanted to tell you. There are moments when a man hears the hammer he has carried his whole life strike something that rings like a bell. Thank you, I said. The word had weight. Also, he said, we planted the juniper. I smiled. Then I suppose the servicer can forget the fines. He exhaled, laughing. They are tough. They have a board that drinks black coffee, I said. Do they take holidays? He asked. On sandwich days, I said. When the baby was born, a girl with a mouth that looked like it already knew 3 languages, Clara asked me to be in the photograph taken 5 minutes after history changed. Nurses moved around us like precise angels. I held my granddaughter with both hands as if she were made of earthquakes and lullabies. What will you tell her when she asks what a bum is? Clara whispered, her voice part prayer, part apology. I will tell her what we learned, I said. That it is a word for people who forgot where they came from and want to export their amnesia. I will tell her our family doesn't use that language. We pour better. At the baby's naming, Adrian's father approached me with the stiffness of a man who had taken an elevator that stopped on a floor he did not choose. Edward, he said, I misjudged you. We all misjudge the thickness of our masks, I replied. He blinked, then nodded. If you ever want to join us at the club, I prefer places where people talk with their hands, I said, lifting mine. He looked at my knuckles, at the map Clara once disliked, and then he surprised me. He reached out and touched the ridge under my thumb. I see the roads, he said. Not was, is. Months passed. Lily wrote me a school essay titled Infrastructure of Kindness and won a ribbon that meant more to me than checks ever did. Noah learned to make a sandwich with the correct balance of salt and mercy. The scholarship fund sent me copy-paste letters full of gratitude that smelled like templated rain. Then one day a student wrote a real one in pencil, and the words looked like scaffolding erected in a windstorm. I am the first in my family to use rebar, he wrote. Thank you for believing that steel can be gentle. On the 2nd anniversary of the wedding, I walked by the potted palm in the hotel lobby where a different bride was teaching the world how to look at her. The service door breathed against its hinges. I thought of the boy with the beard and wondered whether he ever found his lens. I stepped into the ballroom for a moment, just long enough to smell orchids and remember how a word can be a weapon or a tool depending on who holds it. Then I left, because the story I needed to build was waiting in my yard, where weeds always pretend they're the only things that know how to grow without permission. When the twins, because the second baby arrived 1 year later with the same stubborn fist, were big enough to sit upright in my workshop, I taught Lily and Noah how to measure twice and cut once while the babies watched me as if patience had a color. Clara came by with her arms full and her eyes bright. Adrian carried a juniper sapling he'd dug from his yard. Insurance, he said. We planted it by the fence where it could argue with wind and wind. That night, I took out Mara's letter and read the paragraph again, the one that understands time better than clocks. If grief makes you quieter, Ed, don't confuse that with humility. You can be kind and still speak. You can be generous and still set the price. I set the letter down and wrote a new one beneath it, addressed to the future. Tonight, my daughter did not call me a bum. She called me to ask how to secure a load in the back of a borrowed pickup so it would not shift on the highway. I told her, tighten the straps until the cargo thinks it was born in that shape. She laughed. Then she asked, Dad, how do you secure a life? I said, with the same tools. Attention, friction, love that refuses to slide when the road leans. If you are waiting for a confession that I wanted, secretly, to stand up at the wedding and announce the number, here it is. I did not. I wanted to leave with my silence, build a net, and return with a ladder. I wanted my grandchildren to watch me climb, not fall. I am old enough to know victory is not the sound of someone else hitting the floor. It is the sight of the people you love walking steadily on a surface you prepared, a surface that never once had to prove it was stronger than any word. A year later, the servicer sold the note back to a new lender because the payments were boring enough to make money yawn. I allowed the sale because dignity does not require a grudge to keep it fed. The juniper by the fence outgrew its stake. On afternoons when the wind insists on remembering, I stand beside it and listen to how it says yes to every direction and still grows exactly where it planned. Sometimes I get letters from strangers who were at the wedding. They say they tell the story at parties, the old man who turned a word into a wall and then a doorway. They always want to know whether the rumor is true, whether I am worth $11 million. I write back and tell them I am worth exactly 2 sandwiches, 4 grandchildren, a juniper, and a scholarship that teaches kindness to cure like concrete. Then I add a postscript that says, if you must count, count the roads that still hold after the first winter. Count the people who stopped calling anyone a bum. The day Lily turned 12, she stood at my door with a notebook and a list of questions about interest rates, amortization schedules, and how to tell when generosity is being stolen and renamed charity. We made tea. I drew diagrams. She took notes. At the end, she asked if she could write the word bum on a piece of paper and feed it to the compost. Paper takes time, I said. So does learning, she replied. We buried the word beside the juniper. Months later, Noah announced with triumph that new basil had sprouted there and that we should use it in sandwiches. We did. It tasted like a lesson that had finally learned to feed the right mouths. On a cool evening after the twins' 3rd birthday, Clara stood on my porch in the sweater Mara used to wear when the weather promised rain but wasn't sure. Dad, she said, do you still have that letter Mom wrote you before her treatment? I brought it out like a candle. We sat at the table and read the paragraph out loud, line by line, until the house learned it again. When we reached the sentence about setting the price, Clara looked at me with eyes that had decided to stop negotiating with people who confuse cruelty for standards. Thank you, she said, for charging me the fee I needed to become myself. It was fair market value, I said. The twins laughed in their sleep. The juniper brushed the siding with the confidence of something that knows the ground is not going anywhere. Somewhere in the city, at a ballroom that rents heaven by the hour, another daughter tried on a word she thought would make her tall. I hope someone beside a service door heard it land and decided to plant something better with it. I hope one of my scholarship kids poured a sidewalk that refused to crack beneath a new family's front steps. When people ask me now whether I am rich, I tell them I am finally fluent in my own language. It took an insult to teach me the grammar of boundaries. It took a mortgage to remind me that love is a contract written every morning in how we carry each other's weight. It took 11 million quiet dollars to discover that I never needed to say the number aloud to become what I wanted to be all along. A man whose hands look like maps you can trust. Sometimes, very late, I take out the old tuxedo rental receipt and keep it the way some men keep stones from rivers they crossed. It cost less than a single plate at the wedding, but it purchased the lesson that turned my silence into a structure. I put the receipt back in the drawer with Mara's letter, with the photographs, with Lily's essay, and Noah's recipe for sandwiches. And I sleep. Not perfectly, my knees still argue and the refrigerator is older than it admits, but well enough to wake with a vow that holds. Today I will be kind, and I will speak, and I will set the price with a steady hand. If you find yourself at a party where someone laughs at a father and calls him a bum, come find me. I have a sandwich for you, and a story about a juniper that learned to stand through every wind, and a girl who thought a word was a ladder until she realized it was a hole, and a man who built a floor over it and kept building until everyone he loved could dance. I didn't mention my $11 million at my daughter's wedding until she called me bum in her speech. I mention it now only to say it was never the point. The point was the price of dignity, paid in boundaries and forgiveness, and the thousands of quiet days that followed, each one a road still holding, each one a proof that kindness poured true can carry anything.
My grandpa's words really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales stories like this, hit subscribe.